Good evening, this is Robertson Janis coming to you once again this week, the last week of September 2019. This program is set aside for you to ask any questions you would like regarding our movie The Principle, things to do with science, issues regarding the flat earth, very popular subject today, things of that nature. So anything you want to discuss or are concerned about, have a question about, we have a box over here. You can type in your question and I'll be happy to answer it. So for those of you who are not familiar with the principle or anything that we've done for the last 16 years now in this field of science, dealing with all the issues that come up, whether they regard, what goes around what, whether there was a Big Bang, whether there's a multiverse, whether there's dark matter, dark energy, whether the universe is expanding, whether the earth is moving, what's the speed of light, all those kinds of things. I'd be happy to address them from the knowledge that we have amassed over the last 16 years in making our movie. Our movie was The Principle, and it came out in 2014, 5 years ago, in October, right around this time. First appearing in Chicago, then Los Angeles. And at one time in Los Angeles, it was the fourth highest movie per capita. We had won that category, and I think at that time, what was the movie about the sniper? What American Sniper was it? That had the #1 spot. Our movie had the #4 spot for that week, at least. So we did get up in the charts, and then we had the movie in theaters and other cities of America, probably about, 10 to 15 more cities, and that was all the money we had. So we spent our wad, and that was it. Now it's on DVD. You can get the DVD or streaming or downloading at various places, all the popular places that it's available. And you can go to theprinciplemovie.com to see all that, okay? And there's a lot of interesting stories surrounding The Principle, how it was targeted to be obliterated by the secular media and even a lot of religious media at that time. And that was April 2014 when the big explosion came against us. But we survived and put the movie out a few months later in October, and we are living to tell about it. So here I am to help you sort out any of those issues that are of concern to you. We do have books available, as you may find on the Principle website. So let me just take a few minutes to give you a taste of what that is and what they are. Hold on one second while I turn around. And so here we have the Principle DVD, as I said, available. Now it was called the Principle because it's dealing with the major belief in cosmology today called the Copernican Principle. That is the idea that the Earth is nothing special, that we are out there in the remote recesses of space with no rhyme or reason to our existence, and if there is a center, we're far from it, and we really have no significance at all compared to any other rock, whether that rock has fire or has moss growing on it. Makes no difference. We're just another part of the group, so to speak. And this is the reigning theory in cosmology and, any ology you want to talk about today. That's the reigning theory, that the Earth is nothing special. Okay, we take the opposite view, of course. The Earth is something special because we are right in the center of the universe, and all the scientific evidence shows that to be the case. And we get into a lot of that scientific evidence in this movie, The Principle. We interview some of the top scientists in the world on this very topic. I don't know if some of these are on, no, they're not on the back there. I think our other one did have it on the back. Michio Kaku, for example, is in our movie. He's interviewed at length. Lawrence Krauss, same thing. Max Tegmark of MIT. George F.R. Ellis, physicist, mathematician from South Africa. A few other names in here. And so we tried our best to get the top people to talk about this subject. And one of the first of its kind, and probably the last of its kind, I would predict. So it's still available, and at a modest price of $14.95. So don't miss it. And then, of course, we have the sequel, Journey to the Center of the Universe. This is a 4.5-hour documentary on the same subject material, but much more in depth. It covers all the things that The Principle couldn't cover. And that's why it's 4.5 hours long. The Principle is 1.5 hours long. So this is here for your viewing pleasure. And I put this together myself, wrote it, produced it, and well, I did have a producer. I'm the executive producer, let's put it that way. I wrote the script and helped put it all together. So that is available. This is a 2-disc set, so it's a little more expensive. I think it's $24.95 if I remember correctly. I'm not sure. Okay. Then there's another movie we have. I made this one free, and that is on YouTube. So if you go look under the title, Einstein, the Closet Geocentrist, you will be able to find that. That is a 2.5-hour documentary written, produced, and directed by yours truly about Albert Einstein and his beginning theories and his ending theories, and how they all relate to the subject of where the Earth is in the universe. And you're going to be quite surprised to find out the true Albert Einstein. There's a lot of myths about Einstein and what he believed and where he sits in the chambers of science. Quite a provocative story to tell you about the real Albert Einstein and what he really believed. And he's actually a lot closer to our point of view than he is to secular science. And you'll be intrigued to find all that out. For you newcomers, we have a book called Geocentrism 101. Okay, not too thick, about 250 pages, available for you, PDF as well. And we have another book I just wrote, Geocentrism for Dumpskis and Smart Kids. More or less the same material, but on a much simpler level. At least I hope it is. And for you big boys out there who want to get into the nitty-gritty of everything, this is the first book that we published. Galileo was wrong, the church was right. And a modest 740 pages here. Volume 2 is about the same. And we have a volume 3. And that covers, about a little slimmer than this one. That covers the history of the church and Galileo, Copernicus, Kepler, all those political issues that were current at the time, and theological issues, biblical issues, all those. You'll find that all in a 3-volume set. Galileo was wrong, the church was right. Okay? And my co-author there is Robert J. Bennett. He has a PhD in physics, specializing in general relativity. And he was worth his weight in gold on this book. And I thank him for all his contributions. So that is available. And, you know, we're going to get a little pricey here, I guess. It's about $40 here for the hardback edition. And so the whole 3 volumes can set you back by, I think, you know, $80, $90, but well worth it. It's the only book of its kind available in the world right now, okay, because we go into things that others have not gone into and cover it in a very detailed, comprehensive way. So that is available for you. All right, and you can get those at the website gwww.dvd.com. gwww.dvd.com. I think you can also get these at the Journey to the Center of the Universe.com. Goes to the same place, and so all those books are available there for your reading pleasure. All right, so let's go to our question box over here, and I'll read the questions. There's Ben. Nice to see you, Ben. Good evening, Robert. I believe that there is no intelligent anywhere else, no intelligent life, I think you meant, than anywhere else in the universe, but only on Earth, per the teachings of Pope Pius II. However, there have been many credible accounts of reputable people who have seen UFOs or even have been abducted by a UFO. Is it possible that these UFOs exist but are piloted by fallen angels or even piloted by people possessed by demons or fallen angels? This is an explanation put forth by certain Catholics as well as some Protestants. What do you think, please? Thank you. Keep up your fine work. Okay, so UFOs. All right, so yeah, you know, 90% of the UFOs, and this is even admitted by UFO enthusiasts, are fake. Okay, nothing to them, nothing burgers. 90%. There's the 10% that even the experts don't have an explanation for. Okay, so we will admit that there is a percentage, small percentage, and some even believe it's less than that, about 5%. But nevertheless, a small percentage of UFOs that can't be explained, at least by the extent of the study, the availability of the material to study. For example, you know, UFOs are seen for a few seconds and then they disappear. So not much you can study there. All you have is a sighting and then it vanishes. So it's not like you can put this under the microscope and find out what's going on, all right? So that's a handicap in the whole study of things. We find these in areas where the population is more susceptible to these kinds of things than other populations are. That's been noted in these kinds of studies. The fact that there are things that, for example, we have the computers today. We've had them since the early 1980s, at least on a marketable level, okay? We've had them sold as PCs, let's say around 1983, 1984 or so, okay? But the technology for computers was in development like 30 years prior to that, and they became more confined, and the government basically was in control of computers, okay? They had contracts with computer makers, but the government was really the only one that had computers. And that didn't change until Bill Gates basically changed the dynamics of all that and left Harvard and became a Microsoft CEO and started selling PCs, IBM PCs. And you know, IBM had been into this market before, and then once Gates got into the picture, they started selling PCs. And then, of course, we had, you know, Macintosh and all that, so it was an explosion. But prior to that, the technology was there, okay? So it may be something just like that with UFOs. I mean, if we see a UFO going a supersonic speed, zigzagging in the sky, you know, that may be technology that is had been developed or is being developed by various countries of the world, whether it's India, China, Russia, United States, whoever has the ability to do that, and kept very secret. Okay, and every once in a while, they get caught doing a test flight, or something is sent over to the United States to basically put a scare into the United States, and you know, we draw our conclusions. The crafts come in and out, and so they don't make a great display. They just make a showing and leave us to our own devices to try to figure out what's going on. I mean, that's a very real possibility. Okay, and I think this whole thing about not really being able to study them, and then say the UFO enthusiasts claiming that, well, all the spacecraft that have crashed or landed are being stored in Area 51. Okay, well, you know, that's convenient. There's absolutely no proof to that. Okay, we know that's a secret area, but there's a lot of secret areas. Everything the government has that's basically military is secret. Not any Joe Schmo can just walk in there, and only under supervision would you even be able to get into a place like that. All right. So, and we've developed, you know, stealth bombers. We have, you know, craft that can go Mach 3. You know, it just gets better and better all the time because we figure out how things work. And you know, but nobody's has a spaceship that sees a Martian engine in it and has taken it apart and what they call reverse mechanics and try to find out how it works. There's just no such thing that exists where we could do that. Okay, and then you have to ask the next question: why are these UFOs, you know, sort of making a 10-second display on the stage and then disappear? Okay, what advantage is that to them? What are they trying to accomplish if these are some, you know, beings from outer space? It doesn't make any sense, in other words, is what I'm trying to say. All right, and that's all we've seen for the last 50 years. These crafts will come in. That's the 10% that we have no explanation for. Will come in and then go out. You know, so it's almost like somebody's teasing us, you know, trying to make us think that there's something and escaping before some real study can be applied to those crafts to see what they really are and where they come from. Okay, so now as far as people being taken into ships, alien spaceships and all that, my gosh, you know, this is why taking a course in psychology is very important. Whether you're a theologian, a physicist, a chemist, a doctor, a lawyer, or an Indian chief, it's always nice to take a little bit of psychology, and you can study how mass delusion, mass hysteria works. Okay, people can actually believe that they have done something that they've never done because they believe in the idea so firmly. Okay, take a look at the political scene we have today. I mean, we just had hearings on President Trump of whether this letter or this phone call that he had with the Ukrainian president is an impeachable offense. And if you ever want to see two sides to a story, you know, go watch the congressional hearing that went on today. I mean, it's like these people don't even know each other. And they're seeing two totally different realities, what they think is reality, from one reality. okay? And they're convinced. They are absolutely convinced of their position, okay? But they are 180 degrees apart from one another, okay? How can that be? Well, obviously, one side or both is either not seeing the truth, exaggerating the truth, distorting the truth, or believe so firmly in their political position that nothing, no matter how convincing it may be, whether Democrat or Republican, will be able to change their mind. Okay? That's a lesson in psychology right there. And this is the way people are. Okay? You got Catholics and Protestants. Okay? I've been, dealing with, in my work as a Catholic apologist, trying to convince Protestants that they're all wrong. All right? And they're trying to convince me that I'm all wrong. All right? How can that be? We see the same truth. We've been given the same Bible. All right? Well, that's because something has clicked in our mind to convince us that only one position is right and the other position is totally false. And we make it appear that way when we argue with them. Okay? So here again, you have wide differences of opinion about the same reality, okay? And life is like that, all right? It's just very complicated. So I have no problem believing that someone could convince themselves that they've been taken aboard a ship, okay? I really don't. And these are the sane people that I'm talking about. Then when you add in the insane people, the people that, just aren't, all the lights aren't on, then you have even a bigger problem, okay? So, and then of all these things that have occurred, we just get scant evidence of it. We just get scant reporting. You'll get a column in a newspaper, and then it dies. Then it's gone, Some of these stick around a while. Somebody will say, well, what about this UFO that occurred in 1967? And but it will be the same thing. It will be a visit by some spacecraft for 15 seconds, and then it's gone. So how do you make a diagnosis of that if you really can't get down and put it under the microscope? It's light. It's all it is. Light. And you can do a lot of things with light. You can bend it, you can curve it, you can make it go faster or slower, you can make it turn colors, you can make a hologram. Light is a very, very tricky thing. And, we've been working for years on how to basically manipulate light. And that's another factor that has to be taken into consideration, okay? So with all that, I just find no convincing evidence that, not that there's not UFOs. UFO stands for unidentified flying object, all right? If you can't identify who it is that's steering it or propelling it, then it's unidentified. But it doesn't mean it's a spacecraft from Mars or Jupiter or some other planet out there in the universe, okay? That is all speculation, all right? And until if and when, we have solid evidence, then I don't think anybody in their collective right mind should be making conclusions that there are aliens out in outer space, okay? And then as you know, we went through the whole theological thing about this. Michio Kaku in our movie, when we were interviewing him in our movie, he's talking about the problems of the multiverse. And he was saying, well, here's some problems. And he's got a Catholic background. His mother was a Catholic. I think his father was some Eastern religion. I forget what it was. I think it was Buddhist. So he's a mixture. He grew up with a mixture in his family. So he's got theological leanings, but then he was talking about the multiverse and the problems with it. And he goes, well, that would mean we would have an infinite number of popes and an infinite number of Jesuses and an infinite number of trinities and all stuff. He's going on and on about that. And I thought it was quite hilarious when we were interviewing him to watch him go in that direction. But on the other hand, he saw the implications of the fact that if you claim there's even one alien out there, and then you add to that the multiverse, it never stops. You can have an infinite number of them. And so in that sense, he would be correct. All right. But what he didn't stop to think of is the fact that if we have 100,000 or 100 billion popes or Jesuses or Trinities, that's quite absurd, isn't it? Yes, it's absurd. So what I'm trying to say is, from a theological angle, the whole idea of having aliens from other planets is absurd. And for those of us who believe biblical revelation as divine, there was only one cause for the sin in the universe. And the universe is included. It's not just the earth, it's not just humankind that are affected by sin. The whole universe, according to the Bible, was affected by one man's sin. And it all started to deteriorate at the time that he sinned, and is presently deteriorating and will eventually be destroyed and set aside, never to be remembered again, until we have a new heaven and new earth. Okay? And one man controls that as well. His name is Jesus Christ. Okay, so we already have our answer. The Bible tells us what the answer is. And that is, there's only one race of living beings with intelligence, and that is the human race. There is no other race of beings out there. And all this talk of either trying to find them or claiming that we have them is just a ploy. It's a ploy because it will benefit the secularist, because the secularist will say, I told you so. In other words, he believes that we all came from time and chance, and that if there's life on earth, or since there's life on earth, that means there has to be life elsewhere, because the same time and chance possibilities would be working in other parts of the universe. And whether it's 1 out of 100 billion or 1 out of 100 trillion, that doesn't matter. If there's one outside of the earth, that's all they need to say that we came by time and chance, that the universe basically exploded by itself and performed its whatever it has to do and finally created biological beings. Okay? If they find one, that's all they need. All right? So they're on a desperate search for that one out of a trillion or out of a quintillion or whatever they think they're going to find. And that's what's behind it all. And they know instinctively that if life is just on Earth and there's no life out in the universe anywhere, that it makes the Bible all the more credible. You see, because the Bible gives us all the answers of why we are in the state we're in, where we came from, and where we're going. Okay? They don't like that. And so that's the push for having alien life in other parts of the universe. Okay? So I hope I've given you enough food for thought on that. Okay, so Adam says, greetings, Dr. Sungenis. Are Catholics obliged to hold the traditional view of creation, or is it a matter where disagreement is acceptable? Well, let's ask what the traditional view of creation is. Okay? The traditional view is that the world, God created the world, the universe, in 6 days, 6 24-hour days. Okay? That's the view that we have from the patristics. from the church fathers. To a man, they believed that. Now, there was one, St. Augustine, who in his earlier years held to that 24-hour, 6-day pattern as the proper interpretation for Genesis. And then later on, he had another view. And that other view, which I believe was mistaken, and for good reasons, which I may get into shortly. But Augustine's view was that the days of Genesis are actually one day, or what he would call an instantaneous creation. That is, God spoke and the whole thing was created at once. And so he then has to answer, well, why the days? Why does it say there was evening and morning the first day, there was evening and morning the second day, so on and so on for all the 6 days? And his answer is that the days were for the contemplations of the angels about the creation. That's his explanation. I find it quite absurd because, angels don't need contemplation of the creation days, number one. Number two, they can just be told, what the creation is. And then the next thing is, well, why do you have to cut it up into 6 days? Okay, what is it about the partitioning of 6 days that the angels can somehow understand it better than if God said, I created everything all at once? Okay, so I don't think there's any rhyme or reason for Augustine's view. And the fact that the fathers that went before him, I mean, if Augustine is going to be faithful to the fathers that went before him, and the fact is that the closer we are, that is the fathers are, to the apostles, the more credibility they have of what the correct view is. And all these fathers before Augustine believed in 6 24-hour days. Then, basically I would ask the question, I don't mean to be crass here, but where does Augustine come off in saying that they're not 6 24-hour days, when the whole tradition prior to him said that very thing? And then when you go and analyze why he came to that position, I just explained that the 6 days were made for the angels' contemplation, which makes no sense to me whatsoever. And then you get into the exegetical reasons why Augustine went down that path. And I have to be fair to him. At the end of the whole thing, he says, look, I don't know. He basically comes out and says, I don't know. And I leave this for others to study. And he just basically was ruminating on what he thought another possibility could be. But then again, St. Augustine was into allegorical interpretation, following the Alexandrian school, and the Eastern fathers, to a man, believed in 6 24-hour days, like Basil, Gregory Nazianzus, Chrysostom, and they took the Bible very literally. Okay, it was the Latin fathers, led by Augustine, basically, who were tending towards some allegorical interpretations as well. And they were into some numerology as well, some of these Latin fathers. So now, and I was going to say something else about Augustine's exegetical prowess here, which comes into play. There was a passage of scripture that Augustine looked at, and it came from the book of Sirach in the Old Testament, chapter 18, verse 1. And Augustine didn't know Greek, or if he did, it was very shoddy. He didn't know Hebrew. Okay, so that was out. And he didn't know Greek well enough to read it until very late in his life. Okay, so here we are, we have this great father who all he's depended upon is the Latin Vulgate for his understanding of Scripture. Okay, now the Latin Vulgate is a good translation by and by, but it has problems. Okay, and we know that because if we compare Jerome's translation to some of the original Hebrew and Greek, he goes off the beaten path. And not very much, okay? I mean, but there are some crucial areas where he does get into some translations that are questionable, at the least. And one of them was Sirach 18:1, that Augustine is reading, and is now going to base his whole view of Genesis 1 on Sirach 18:1 from the Latin Vulgate. Okay? And in that passage, Sirach is talking about the creation, and he says that it happened simul. That's the Latin word that he uses. And Augustine takes the word simul, which is where we get the English word simultaneous, okay? And he says, from this word simul, we are to interpret Genesis 1 as happening all at the same time, simultaneously. Okay? All the days are created simultaneously in one instant, okay? And the problem with that is the original Greek of, if you're going to use the Septuagint version, which Augustine couldn't read, and you didn't know the grammar, the Septuagint version says that all things were made koine. All right? That means in common. All right? That is, they were all made by God. If you read the sentence grammar, that's what you come out with. Nothing that we see was ever created by somebody else, so to speak. They were all created by God, whatever we have. And that's all the verse is saying. All right? But somehow Augustine is getting simultaneous out of the Latin word simul, and that's a tragedy. Because for the next 1,500 years, we have theologians racking their brains trying to say, well, Augustine is such a great theologian, we got to go with him here. And regardless, even when Augustine himself says, look, I don't know what the truth is. I'm just basically laying out thoughts here for others to build upon. He wasn't dogmatic at all. And thanks be to God, he was of that frame of mind. He was humble about the conclusions he was coming to. So, we have that much. But, some Catholics think Augustine is like a god. He can, do no wrong. They also think the same thing about Aquinas. Aquinas can do no wrong. Everything he says is like it's dropped from heaven. Well, I can tell you for a fact that's not true. Okay, and neither is Augustine, and neither is any other church father. The reason the church fathers are looked at with high esteem is because when they are in consensus, the likelihood is that they are transmitting what was believed and taught by the early church, namely Jesus and the apostles. And that's why we call it apostolic oral tradition. Okay, not just tradition, apostolic oral tradition. That is, it had to be a divine revelation given to the apostles, whether in written form or oral form. And the written form was passed down in the Bible. The oral form was passed down by word of mouth through the churches, and the fathers wrote them down. And when they are in consensus on a topic, that means we are pretty sure that that teaching came from the apostolic age. Okay, so we need to stop treating some of these theologians, regardless who it is, as if they can do no wrong. And this is the path that some have taken in the Catholic Church, because a lot of Catholics are evolutionists. Okay, all the major universities today, all the major seminaries, you can count the ones that don't teach evolution on one hand. And I'm talking about all over the world. Okay? They all believe in evolution, and Augustine is the closest thing they can find to evolution, because they say that Augustine believed that somehow the seeds, the genetic seeds of an organism can change into something else. And I wrote a paper on this. I think it's still available on the internet. If not, I should make it available. But the idea here was Augustine's Rationis Seminalis. And that was the idea that there are seminal seeds in an organism that can develop into another organism. And basically all Augustine was saying was that we can get variations from organisms, but we can't get one organism to turn into another species, another whole different organism. That's just not in Augustine. And I go through that so that people can understand that Augustine was not an evolutionist. Okay? I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if Augustine says that the 6 24-hour days believed by the fathers, he now believes is instantaneous, then obviously he can't be an evolutionist, can he? All right? He's actually going the other way. All right? There are some theistic evolutionists that try to take the 6 days of Genesis and try to make each day an epoch of, millions or billions of years. Okay, that's another story altogether. They're called theistic evolutionists. Okay, but Augustine, how can you depend on him as an evolutionist when he believed that, he even believed something faster than the early fathers. Something happened in 1 day instead of 6. All right, so he's no help to them. But they try to make him help, because if they go elsewhere in the patristics, they can't find anybody that even comes close, you see. So, because they all believe in 6 24-hour days. All right, every father. We even have some mentioning 24 hours. Basil, for example, mentions that, and a few other fathers. And the other ones just say 6 days. And you can tell by the context that they mean 24-hour days. Okay, so that's the traditional view. All right, if you want to know, there is no evolution. All right, and that's in the face of the fact that the Greeks were teaching evolution. All right, they were teaching about atoms and molecules and how they would interchange with one another and form life and all this stuff. The idea of evolution by Darwin and Lyell and all these other people in the 1800s was nothing new. It came from the Greeks, and we just basically stole their idea and developed it. Okay, the same thing with heliocentrism versus geocentrism. This is not a new idea with Galileo. This came from the Greeks. Half of them were heliocentrists, half were geocentrists. Okay, so that's why the Greeks are so famous. Because they hit all these major topics. And philosophy, that's why all philosophy classes start with Aristotle and Plato, because they're basically the 2 divisions of philosophy that you have to deal with in any philosophy that comes down the pike in the Middle Ages or the modern ages. All right, if you don't understand Plato and Aristotle, you'll never understand philosophy. But the seeds of it were in the Greeks, you see. And so these were an amazing people, the Greeks, and that's why society today is even called Greek. We still have Greek ideas, and they're quite dominant. We think like Greeks. We have vocabulary like Greeks. We have logic like Greeks. It's amazing what an influence they've had on culture that came down the pike. At any rate, so that's the traditional view. And then we have councils. For example, the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215. No, 1240, I believe. Yeah, 1240. made a statement, and it said that everything that was created by God, and nothing that we see was not created by God. Okay, all things, it says. And you can go in there and examine the Latin words, and they are very precise. And so it basically says the mundane things were created, and the man after that was created, and the angels were created. Okay? And the fact that it makes a distinction between the mundane things and then it says, and then man, okay, in the Latin word there's diende, and then man, shows you that it recognizes that the mundane things for the first 5 days were created, and then after that, the man was created. So it's not instantaneous, all right? There is a partition there. Now, although they don't partition it into 6 days, they basically filled that category by calling it the mundane world. That is, you know, inanimate objects, all that stuff, and then you get man on the 6th day, okay? That was, and they meant it to teach that the creation occurred in 6 days, 6 24-hour days, even though they didn't mention the numerical equivalent 24 hours, okay? Because everybody, when they used 6 days, there was no argument. When you said days, everybody understood you to mean 24 hours a day, all right? It's only later in modern times when the word day is now confused and to possibly mean something longer than 24 hours, okay? And that's because the Catholic evolutionists worked very hard, the liberals worked very hard to try to change that mentality, okay? That's where it all came from. And so, again, Vatican I in 1870 reiterated what Lateran Council IV had said about creation. And as a matter of fact, they added a phrase in it and said that, how does it go, that they were created with a certain substance, and that substance is unchanged. Okay, so that's another wrinkle that Vatican I added. Some people try to philosophize about that, but basically it means that they all had their own substance. They all created with a certain substance, and that substance does not change. Okay, so we have a reiteration basically of what Lateran IV was teaching all the way up to 1870, and that's curious because it's Darwin's Origin of Species that was published in 1859. So 11 years later, the Catholic Church comes out with its own statement, basically, and puts Darwin's Origin of Species to bed, at least for Catholics who are being faithful to their tradition. All right, but there were a lot of liberal Catholics at this time. I could mention a few names, but they were churning out the opposition. And that's because Darwin and Lyell and all these other evolutionists had a great influence. Science was coming into its own, okay? I mean, we never had this before, where you could look into a telescope or a microscope and see things that we've never seen before and make conclusions about those things that you were seeing. And I've always been amazed at what James Crick said when he discovered the DNA molecule. Now, he was a total atheist, okay? And when he saw the DNA molecule, and if I hope most of you know what that is, it's in every cell of our body. It's basically the blueprint of life, okay? And it's a double helix molecule that's very large, and it works basically on 4 amino acids that recombine in different ways. And, you know, that's what gives me blue eyes and dark hair and, you know, whatever. And you did something different. It's all because of the DNA. So you can imagine how complicated it is, because the very hairs of your head are all dependent on the DNA you have, okay? No part of your physical appearance, no part of your internal workings, the heart, the lungs, how they work, whether you have sickle cell anemia or not, is all dependent on your DNA, okay? Nothing that you are escapes being formed from the DNA. And so you can imagine how complicated a molecule it is. And when James Crick saw this, he said, "You're not going to believe this one. Now I know there isn't a God." Okay? Something that you would probably look at and say, wow, there must have been some great intelligence behind this DNA molecule to put it all together, make it function, and put it into a body and have it interact with everything and you know, produce what we see in front of our own mirror. You know, normal people would look at it that way, but not James Crick, because he was a devoted atheist. And that meant, in his frame of mind, that we don't have to believe the supernatural miracles and all the biblical stories about this God coming down from heaven and shaking the earth and causing a flood and all this stuff. You see, that's all superstition. Now we know that science is what makes man man. Now we know the intricacies of what makes a man a man. It's this DNA molecule. Mind you, he's not telling us how it all came together, okay, which is something he doesn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole, because it'd be impossible for him to tell us how a DNA molecule came together all by itself, okay? And so they'll find any excuse they want to try to deny God's existence. And that's all man does all his life, is he looks for excuse after excuse to deny God's existence. Okay, whether it's science or whatever it is. And that's because he's trying to cover his sins, because he knows that his sins will require judgment. And the only way to get rid of that is to get rid of the God behind it. And if he has to use science to do so, he will, you see. So, you know, the church basically put the brakes on evolution in the Middle Ages. And then, of course, as science gained steam, you know, Darwin, William James, Albert Einstein, you know, all the famous physicists from the 1920s who made the atomic bomb. And, you know, so science was coming into its own. I mean, it was like, hey, we can make an atomic bomb, the ultimate killing machine, and we can make it by science. So there's your God, okay? We've become God, basically, because we can annihilate the whole human race in a matter of 10 minutes. Yeah, wow. Okay, that's the kind of mentality you have today with science. They think they're gods, and they've accomplished what the devil offered them in the Garden of Eden. That's what he said to Adam and Eve. You see, God knows that you'll become gods just like he is. You know, well, that's what they are today, so they think. Okay, so with that kind of mentality, you can imagine what's going to happen to the 24-hour creation story of Genesis. You know, at the same time in the 1800s, there were men who were just basically ripping apart the Old Testament. And we have things like the JEDP theory, you know, the documentary hypothesis, which said that Moses didn't write the first 5 books of the Bible. They were written by 4 different men, at least 4 different men. Okay, the Yahwist, the Elohist, the Deuteronomist, and the Priestly come from all different times. Okay, for example, Stanley Yaki, one of the famous Catholic theologians and scientists of the last century, who died, I don't know, maybe 10 or so years ago, taught at Seton Hall University. okay, believed in evolution. And the way he would explain Genesis, where it came from, is this. And this is the major reigning theory. It's not just him. It's taught all over Catholic seminaries and universities today, and it's dead wrong. Okay. And that theory is that the Genesis chapter 1 was written by a priest who was in the Babylonian captivity that the Jews went into, that Judah went into in 586 BC or 587 BC. Okay. And when you're in Babylon, the god that controls Babylon at that time was Marduk, M-A-R-D-U-K. And when 70 years transpired, of course, they don't believe it's 70 years anymore. They think it's 50 years. But when that time transpired that the Israelites were supposed to come back by the promise of God to Jerusalem, leaving Babylon after that captivity, the reigning theory is, and Stanley Yaki believes this, or believed it, is that the Israelites wanted to reinvigorate themselves, and they wanted to get out of the shackles of being under the god Marduk for 70 years. And so they made up this story, a creation story that rivaled the creation story they got from the Babylonians that wrote about Marduk and all his exploits. Okay? So basically, it wasn't in other words, the priest who's going to write Genesis 1 is not writing it because this event actually happened. Okay? He's writing it because he's in competition with the Babylonian god Marduk and wants to make the Jewish God better than Marduk, so that the Jewish people can be reinvigorated, that their God is strong. And he's the one leading them back to Jerusalem. And of course, that's half right. Okay, we accept that much. But the whole Genesis story was written to sort of enhance this idea that God is taking them back to Jerusalem. All right. It has nothing to do with creation. All right. So it's basically, he's lying to them. And this is what these liberals just don't get, that when they invent these theories, they're telling us that the people lied to us, never told us the truth of what was really going on, and we have accepted this as truth because it's in the Bible, and we have believed wrongly all this time. Now all these scholars are going to enlighten us now that for 1900 years we've been looking at the Bible wrong because we've been taking it at face value as if Genesis 1 was actually a creation story. Okay? When in fact it was just an historical invention by some Jew in the 6th century BC. Okay? That's the kind of teaching that's taught in our seminaries and in our universities today. And they swear by it. Okay? So, in other words, as I was saying, they basically ripped the Bible apart. The Bible can no longer be taken for what it says, at least in the historical narratives of the Bible. So Genesis 1 is out. Okay? Genesis 2, they said, came earlier in the time of Joshua. That was created, and there's a whole reason why they give for that. So Genesis 1 and 2, which in your Bible seems like one follows the other in chronological sequence, or at least the second one adds to the first so that it enhances in more detail what happened in the first chapter. Not according to the liberal Catholics. Okay? Those two passages are separated by at least 700 years, according to them. Okay? So, this is the kind of upheaval that we've had in Catholicism in the last century, and it's still going today. All right? So, the tradition, you ask, what's the tradition? Well, that's been mutilated beyond repair. There's just a handful of Catholic theologians today who hold to what the tradition held, unfortunately. Okay, so there you have it. Okay, I probably gave you more there than what you wanted to hear, but you know, we have an audience here, and I think they need to hear all this. So I told you what Catholic tradition is. It's your choice whether you want to follow it or not. And believe me, it can be defended. And it can be defended on a scientific level. Okay? Evolution is a big lie. They can't support one iota of what they teach scientifically. And that can be shown rather easily. Okay? Geocentrism on the same level, that can be supported scientifically with no problem whatsoever. And that's why I told you about the new movie I have out, Einstein, the Closet Geocentrist, because that's what you're going to go find when you see that movie. You're going to see that he was a geocentrist but didn't want to admit it. Okay? And that's because that's where his theory led him. At any rate, I can go on and on. You also want to know what disagreement is acceptable. No disagreement is acceptable. Look, you're going to either be a Catholic and hold to the tradition, or you're not. Okay? And the Council of Trent was clear. If the fathers in consensus teach a certain teaching, that's what we are to hold. Okay? So from my framework, there is no excuse. There is no tolerable level of disbelieving what the Bible teaches at face value and what the fathers taught about that as far as cosmology and cosmogony are concerned. The only competition against that would be what secular scientists are saying of how the world started and where it came from. You know, their Big Bang theory. But not only is that against the Bible, it doesn't even work. Okay? And that's what also our movie is about, the principle. You know, Michio Kaku comes right out himself and says, we've never been off by such a margin in the whole history of science. Okay? When you're trying to support the Big Bang theory. Because it's a great concept. Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? We all started from an explosion and sort of solidified after billions of years. But they can't make it work scientifically. And they keep patching it up and patching it up and patching it up for all the anomalies. But the anomalies are so great now that it's just going to fall by its own weight. And I predict that's going to happen within the next few years. Okay? It'll fall apart, but they'll never allow themselves to admit that, because if they allow it to fall apart on a political level or popular level, where else are they going to go? There's no other place. Okay? And they're desperate. They're desperate atheists to take God off the stage and continue to do so. And so they'll make up any story that will fit, at least, you know, for the time being, until somebody figures out what shenanigans they've used to get to that place and destroy it. Okay? And that's where we are right now. So stay tuned. Jonathan says, is it possible to go around the Van Allen belts instead of through them? I don't know, Jonathan. I've never done it. So, you know, there's two theories on that. You know, Van Allen belts, it's from what they've measured, that is some tremendous radiation. You know, a metal plate could withstand it, okay, but whether a living organism can withstand it, okay, that's, you know, I don't think they've never sent a monkey in a spaceship through the Van Allen belts. The monkeys they've sent have always been like 500 miles above the Earth. All right, that's it. Okay, because, and that monkey could survive in that kind of altitude. But when you're talking about the Van Allen belts, you know, it's a long ways off. And we know for a fact that our magnetic poles creating the magnetic field that we have, or around which the magnetic field goes, protects us from that radiation. And if we didn't have that magnetism to disperse those electromagnetic beams, we'd all fry on Earth. Okay? So when you're out in space and you're beyond the magnetic field into the Van Allen belts, wow. And I say I don't know what would happen, because I don't know anybody who's gone through that and come back alive to tell us. I mean, I just don't know. I mean, unless you believe that they went to the moon, they sent a man to the moon, which I find very hard to believe. I don't discount it, but I find it very hard to believe that. And the one reason would be getting a man in a tinfoil spaceship through the Van Allen belts. Okay, any scientist worth his salt will tell you it's going to present difficulty. If it doesn't kill the man, it's going to make him quite sick. And eventually he might die, or die more rapidly, because he's been through that radiation. Okay? I mean, we know what radiation does on Earth. We have atomic bombs. People have died by radiation. We've seen what it does to their bodies, how quickly it deteriorates. Okay? So it's like an atomic bomb in outer space with these Van Allen belts. And it never goes away. It's always there. So, you know, that's quite dangerous. And there was one thing I was going to say about that, and I forget what it was. But, you know, to answer your question, I don't know for certain, but I do know what the logic of the whole thing tells us. Okay, I mean, a spaceship that, I mean, if you go down to the Smithsonian Institution and you see the lunar module, and basically that thing is put together with aluminum foil. Okay, you know, aluminum on the inside that's quite thin, enough to give it structure, because it can't be heavy. Okay, if it's going to have enough thrust to get back and forth, and it's covered with aluminum foil. Now, anybody who knows anything about Van Allen belts will tell you that that's just not going to cut it. That you might need a spaceship that has, you know, walls of iron that are 5 feet thick. But how are you ever going to get that to go beyond the escape velocity of Earth? So it would be impossible. Okay. And then the escape velocity of the moon. All right, so you'd have that all to deal with. So, by the way, someone wrote in from last week asking about my comments on the lunar reconnaissance orbital spacecraft that was taking pictures of the lunar surface. And he just wrote a very short phrase and wanted to know more about it. So I sent him pictures that the lunar reconnaissance craft gave us of the lunar surface. Okay, and I made a mistake last time. I said it was lunar module. I didn't mean lunar module, because that took off. That supposedly took off. So obviously, if it took off, it wouldn't be on the lunar surface. I was talking about the lunar rover. Okay, that vehicle that had 4 wheels that they supposedly, you know, traverse the moon's landscape with. The photograph that the lunar reconnaissance craft gives us says that this spot here is the lunar rover, but you don't see a lunar rover. You see an indentation in the surface of the moon, but you don't see anything resembling a lunar rover. And then they have another picture that I gave the gentleman that shows the lunar reconnaissance craft giving us a photograph of equipment that was supposedly left by the Apollo astronauts on the moon, and you don't see any equipment. You see white squares or white rectangles in places where it is claimed that such and such is the equipment. Okay, and my argument last time was, look, we have satellites that can peer down to the surface of the Earth and see the numbers on my license plate. And you're telling me that this is the best shot you can get of equipment left on the moon, where we can't make out hides or tail of what we're actually looking at, and it just looks like a white blotch? Yeah, no. See, all that does is raise more speculation. It doesn't help their case at all. And I think people need to take this into account. So I just wanted to clarify that point. Okay. We're at 8:15. I went over, and I'm sorry about that. I spent too much time on that tradition question, I think, but I think people should be aware of that. Let me just read these questions, and then I'll just say goodnight. I have the book Galileo Was Wrong, edition 9. What is the current edition? What is new in the more recent editions? Do you anticipate more editions in the future? No, I don't anticipate more editions in the future. I've basically put that to bed. There are 3 more editions after the 9th edition, the 12th edition, for volume 1 at least. Volume 2 and 3 are still in the 11th editions. You know, what happens, you know, somebody asks, well, why do you have so many editions? You know, do you get it wrong every time and you have to go correct it? I say, no. What happens is we get more information, current information, or we find better ways to explain things. Because, you know, it's a lot of stuff, and sometimes it takes a while to sort all out and say, you know, I should have said it that way, or I should have added this, and that information accumulates to such a point where you say, okay, it's time for another edition. I got to put this massive information I found into a new edition. You know, and it's really no sweat off my back to make another edition. It's the easiest thing I could possibly do. You know, as far as production, you know, making the book. I mean, if I had a publisher outside of CAI Publishing that I had to deal with, that would be hard. Okay, but it's not hard for me to do it here with our own publishing company. And what is added to those other editions, especially the 12th edition, is more information about Isaac Newton, basically, and how Isaac Newton can be looked at in 2 ways. One is that he presupposed that heliocentrism was correct because of his understanding of what they call absolute space. Absolute space means the universe can't move. All right. And but he, on the other side, he admitted that a geocentric universe could be possible if the right forces were there. He just didn't know where to find them. By the time of Ernst Mach and Albert Einstein came along in the late 1800s and early 1900s, we knew where to find those forces that Newton had alluded to. And that's part of the whole issue that I cover in the new movie on YouTube called Einstein, the Closet Geocentrist. Okay. So we added all that to the 10th, 11th, and 12th edition in increments because we kept finding more information about that and better ways to explain it, as I said. So it'd be worth you getting it, at least in PDF, if you don't want to spend the big bucks on the hardback copy of the 12th edition, the first volume. Okay, there's a lot of material in there, a lot of mathematics. Okay, I employed a PhD in mathematics, and he's a physicist also from Europe, who had his own article. After he followed us for a while, he wrote his own article, and it got published in the European Journal of Physics in 2013. And I have his whole paper in the 12th edition, and I think the 11th edition as well. I employ the mathematics and the physics of other scientists like him. For example, Andre Acis and a few others. So, yeah, I mean, if you're into mathematics and you want to see how it all works, that would be worth your while to get that. Ron says, Journey to the Center of the Universe is a tour de force. 3 thumbs up. Thank you, Ron. Omar says, I've read volume 1, looking forward to volume 2 and 3. You'll love them. All right, and we have a few more questions here. Yeah, I just can't get to them. I'm starting to lose my voice as well. But I will copy these, and if we have room, again, next week, next Thursday, I will take these questions that you've asked that I haven't gotten to, and I will try to deal with them. And so that will be it for tonight. Thank you for joining me. I've enjoyed this very much. I hope you have too. And we'll set aside this again for next week. And I think that will be October 3rd at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Okay, so until then, I will see you, and may God bless you and keep you safe.